July 21st.
Be afraid, oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
Why did I play that? Well, because part of what I've been trying to do, that we're always thinking and trying to expose. And the thing about it is, you have to be seen first. You have to be seen first, and to be acknowledged and validated. And sometimes we, seek this our entire lives without ever being seen. So most of my recordings for the couple of days has been in regards to this lawsuit with Tsuut'ina, Chief and Counsel, against the former lawyer Terry Braun. I try to record on my podcast as soon as I get a phone with an acquaintance or somebody, or even for that matter, if the conversation is pretty well, I'll record it. Now, I wanted to give you some insight into how angry I am about this supposedly recovery center. Now, you might think, oh, well, what foundation does she have? And for me, it's just the reality, or the lack of reality, of what, like, not being seen for 20 years, championing things that, are vital and essential to my family. And one of the ladies, who's a relative of one of the victims of Nathan Chasing Horse, this victim, like I mentioned her earlier, she appeared on the Fifth Estate, and she was 14 when Nathan introduced himself to her, and that he had taken her 3 times, and he even recorded her. So why do I bring up this young woman? Well, because she wasn't a follower of Nathan Chasing Horses. She didn't belong to his cult. Monies to even keep her quiet or support her, because again, she was a victim. But all the other victims were supported through our nation's funds, through leadership. Now, I've made that comment the last time, I think, this last podcast yesterday, and I said, in hindsight, when you take that oath to protect the most vulnerable, they didn't protect her. And again, too, she was supposed to be in a school that was supposed to protect her. And for me, advocating for youth, like, she's a mom now, and she said, like, he stole this from me. Now, even though my niece didn't listen to me, and people didn't listen to me, there's a reasoning behind all this, and the fact that Nikki did, and she listened to my advice, documenting everything and making sure she had everything documented to take the police. And her mother still thanks me for being there for her daughter. Again, she was never belonged to the cult. She was never a supporter of Nathan Chasing Horse. Right from the get-go, she knew what he had done to her. That's just the history. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Like, well, the reality of it is, like I said, in 1964, in the 60s, even before my nieces and nephews were born, even before I was an adult, alcohol was introduced into our community. And then, of course, my age, we introduced drugs. So, like, that's 74. I mean, I'm 74, so what, 50 years ago? Because we live right by a city. Like, and people don't understand. When I was a child, we used to go all the way down to City Hall. There was a Safeway store there. And that's where the majority of the people in the town of Calgary used to go shopping. Understand this, I think in 1 year, they were saying 10,000 people came in a day to make Calgary their homes. It was in that decade we lost a lot of our Tsuut'ina men. And again, too, there was a lot of alcohol and drug abuse. And again, too, during my times when I would have been able to have kids and, like, what do you call, young and fertile, nobody knew drinking would cause FASE. Nobody. I mean, in Europe, what, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you look at, or even in Italy, or places where there's all these Renaissance paintings, and like bar scenes where you see people with, FAS distorted facial features. So in the old world, alcohol and FASE was quite prevalent. Most of my blog and what I talk about in terms of the naivete or the lack of critical thinking skills has to do with that brain damage that these children had when they were carried in their mother's uterus or their womb. So, and again, too, you look at it in terms of like when I was first in existence on planet Earth, I was in my grandmother's stomach because my grandmother would have had my mother in her stomach. Okay, so like it's just the fact that the DNA or the structure of what we eat and everything goes back in terms of matriarchy, right, to the grandmother. So that's why, like for me at 74 as an elder, and I look back and I'm going, no, I've never had children. I've never had grandchildren. But who's children, and even my own family, were the children, like the women who married in, or like, again, you got to didn't understand this. So most of my, like the conversation I had this morning with a friend of mine is one of our childhood friends passed away, and he had so many children. She said, Marina, majority of them are FASE. And I said, yes, that's what's so disturbing about this recovery center. I said, all the money that could have been siphoned into our healthy living program, money that we could have tried to at least get some sort of sovereignty over the crisis that we're seeing. I've had people deny that, that we have a problem with FASE, and that's okay. I'm an elder. Like I said, you have to actually experience it, see it, live it, breathe it, embrace it. But part of my podcast is to let go of what I embraced. And that's why I advocate for sovereignty over our children. Like my friend said, there are so many thousands of our children in foster care system. And just the reality of the extent of what we have to live through when we talk about restorative and transformative justice and just welcoming our children back into our community, which is no fault of our own. Like we've been under systemic racism like since I was born, before I was even born. That legacy is still around, and part of my podcast is to dismantle these colonial ways of thinking and the constructs. Now, why am I talking about FASE is that a lot of times when we talk about psychosis or personality disorders, all this psychological jargon, it really boils down to the reasoning why even it looks like when Nathan Chasinghorse was arrested, he still had, I'll call them sleeper cells, for the lack of a better word, but there were people who had mental illness problems and mental disorders, we'll say FASE, that for some reason they just got for the lack of a better word, I say the bejesus scared the hell out of them. That to this day they still follow Nathan Chasinghorse even after he's been arrested, sentenced for life. Like I made the example of this young man, like he stayed in my home because he was following Nathan Chasinghorse when Nathan was here supporting my brother with the Sundance. How even after divorce, he's got a 16-year-old son, and yet, all of his money is going into paying a mortgage on a house that Nathan Chasinghorse's parents are living. Now, even that too, when it comes to monies, and that's why like this lawsuit and just like how the former chief is associated with this whole that came in, like when I was talking to my friend, my childhood friend, I said, there's 100,000 that came in over a period of from the timeline, even before Roy Whitney was voted out, like just the desperate need to want to get back into college, even after he was arrested. Like it's sort of diabolical, but when you realize like what he was trying to protect. And so my childhood, this Marina last year, they had a treaty conference. Where did they get the money from? And I said, well, look at this. This guy, I think Mareshi paid 50,000 to, I don't know. There's this whole this whole spider web of monies that came in that was published. Again, I'm trying to say this has been published, documented. The monies that came in through Terry Braun, and just like the 3 point like three almost $4 million in project funds, just stuff that was paid out to Malika Homes, and what even allegedly directed payment of totaling 17 million to the total, like not even the total value to Malika Homes, when Malika only paid 10%. And that even contrary to the nation's procurement policies, like even from September 23, Mareshi Holdings, and like he like the denial of the corruption, and even like 40 million, like how agreement between Sutana and Malika Homes noted that the contractor had paid the nation 40,000 to community support initiatives according to the statement claim, but these funds were instead allegedly paid in 3 installments totaling 49,000. Now, again, too, there was this also in 2023, there was also money, I think 50,000 that allegedly came in. And let's see here, because again, the province is putting 350 million into 11 recovery centers. Now, again, we're talking about just 3 Indigenous communities that are supposedly earmarked for this. And even the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions has been declining comments on this recovery center project. And the reality of it is like, when my childhood friend says, Regina Crowchild and Jeannie Crowchild did a treaty conference when there was no money. Where did they get that money? And I said, well, look at this. I said, look at the money that came in just in regards to this recovery center. That money had to have gone into that conference. So when Lance Miniwounds is, challenging Jeannie Crowchild, who's an elected band member now, her mother, Regina Crowchild, was voted out last term. And he says, you went to the AFN conference, where's this money? Challenging my aunt, like you were a fiduciary for decades, talking about treaty. And he talked about the war chest. He says, for you to talk about treaties, you have to have a war chest. He says, you're up against the oldest monarchy in the world. You're up against establishments that have thousands of money, billions of dollars to fight against our treaties. What do you have? And then you've got one of the band members who's a Crowchild, but not directly related to my Aunt Regina. These are homeless people. This money that comes in, as band members, we don't see this. And rightfully so, because my brother passed away this year. He was homeless. A nation member who I've grown up with, like I keep on saying, I've grown up here in my life. And I said to my childhood friend, I said, the home I have is my mother's old house. And I said, my whole life I've been sidelined, I've been discredited. And so my childhood friend says, well, this relative that just passed away yesterday, she says, I went and I saw all these young men, they're FASE. And I made a comment, I said, well, my nieces were FASE. The one who the chief and council has been supporting, who was a faithful follower of Nathan Chasing Horse for 20 years. I've made comments about her, how vindictive and dangerous she has been to me over the past 20 years. And I also had made comment about my other niece, Roberta how dangerous she was to herself and others. And so I said to my childhood friend, I said, you know, when I talk in Calgary in public art, and I talk about when alcohol came in, and how community was separated and everybody became silent. I said people were drinking, like I saw my sister-in-law, you know, totally inebriated while she was like pregnant, like ready to hatch. Again, you know, throughout my life, watching her and knowing like that something was the matter. But yet again, you know, when they spent money has come in through like the provincial government to do surveys on FASE and even hiring people within the health center to help with our youth. And now I'm saying like our youth are in their 50s. So you've got, again, like I'm doing the timeline on when alcohol was introduced into my community. Now, I said again, in Europe, it's been entrenched in their societies. So it's not as obvious as it is in First Nations and with Métis communities. So what does it all have to do with fucking Nathan Chasing Horse? Everything. He preyed on the vulnerable. I mean, part of his addiction or his perversion was to the propensity for children, scaring the bejesus out of them. So, you know, when you don't have the capacity to have critical thinking skills and you're just focused on that fear, it can hold you prisoner. Now, throughout the decades, I'd had my niece's brother say to me, step in, do something. And I did, like, you know, I said, I have challenged her. I have talked to her children. I've warned them about how dangerous this man is. And I told my nephew, I said, every time I talk to her, try to get some sense into her, she stops talking to me. I said, even before she went down to the States, 5 years ago to support him, she almost died twice that year. And then she stopped talking to me. I texted her for 3 months. She stopped talking to me, stopped texting me everything. And then she got into an accident, and then she had to come home. And when her mother, my former sister-in-law, passed away, the sister said to me at the funeral, she says, I had to approach Chief and Council to help pay for our niece's medical bill, $72,000. So understand this. You know, I have grown up my whole life here. Like I said, any home, anything, you know, I'm a single female with no children, you know, no grandchildren. So the stressors of identifying and working with children that I brought into this world who have FASE, I don't have that. But I have friends, I have relatives that struggle with this every day. And so even though people who know my niece will look and say, oh, there's nothing the matter with her. And I'm going, no, there is. You know, because they're in denial that I have this certain skill, this certain skill set. Nobody saw me. So when I played this song, you know, Stand By Me, I said, you know, the whole important thing is like, you know, we're not alone. When somebody actually sees us for who we are, we're not alone. And for decades, like I wrote my blog, saw me. And so I explained to my childhood friend who, again, you know, she didn't understand my whole reasoning to go down to Las Vegas. And I said to her, you know, Lance Many Wounds and the struggles that he's having just to go through this lawsuit and just the battle he's got, I said, you know, he has the propensity to be a fiduciary, and a damn good one. It's a discredit to all the people who were sort of systematically put in positions of power, and how money was siphoned in as long as you obeyed for Whitney. And then too, because you know you're not going to fight the hand that feeds you. So that's why when I talk about this young woman who had the courage to, you know, try and get Nathan Chaser arrested, she was up against the whole establishment, the leadership. She was up against all of the followers of Nathan Chasing Horse and their mothers. For 20 years, this young woman faced this. Now, again, too, all I could do was put something on my blog. And the fact that, as I told my friend, I said, people are in denial of FASD. And, the artist, he said, oh, I don't see it. Like, he's from Sutina. And I said, and but proof is in the pudding. Because, the reality of it is like, you know, how do people understand? I said, when I say I have two nieces that were a danger to themselves and others, and I brought in Paul so that he could supervise my niece, the visit with her brother and sister. So that's the key reason I had connection with him, because nobody would listen. My niece and nephew weren't under child and family; they weren't under the protection of the province. So as a fiduciary, like I'm the one. I wasn't getting paid for looking after them either. But I had to take this lateral violence from this one particular case. And she had the right to be angry. This man ruined her life, this Nathan Chasing Horse, as well as my brother. And I said he served his time. I mean, even my saying that, I'm gonna have people say, "Oh, well, you supported him." I've had women do that on Facebook, saying that I'm a pedophile because I supported my brother. And the reality of it is like, no, I'm documenting. I'm saying this is, the my niece was a danger to herself and others. And it even made it more extreme when she was sexually assaulted. And then my other niece had two children. And she's like, I think maybe 2 years older than Nathan. And the fact that, she's been such a loyal follower of his, paid money to him, servicing him. I mean, I told my children, part of the reason for me to go to Las Vegas was to meet these followers of Nathan Chasing Horse who I'd had correspondence with, because I wanted to at least have some sort of understanding of why my niece behaved the way she did, and what kind of narrative was she telling people. And the reality of it is that, for decades, Nathan would say to his followers that you've got to get 350 followers. So when I talked to the group of followers that actually he hurt, they said, "Well, Marina, your niece would come in to camp and she'd say that." My niece goes up and fasts at Bear Butte, almost dies because of her diabetes. And this lady, right now in Las Vegas, Marina, even went to Stearns Hospital to visit her. She says that Nathan didn't even have the compassion to go visit her, one of his followers. So even like for me to constantly try to have connection with my niece, even when she went down to the States and just wouldn't talk to me. And then she ends up getting in an accident and he doesn't give a damn. Like really, for all the money that her and her adult children paid out to this man. I mean, we can talk about the fellow in Ontario who, went fundraised and just so his son could be cured of cancer. All this stuff that people would give up, just to. I don't know the rationale behind my 52-year-old niece, but like the reality of it is like she people say, well, she's not following him anymore because he's arrested serving life. And and I say, no, the reality of it, I said, even the fact that she had disclosed to the tribal police that she'd been sexually assaulted by his followers, and the tribal police are telling me, well, she's not following him anymore. And I said, well, I have documentations to the contrary. I said, the lady who did the podcast, who interviewed me and Paul, I said, she's got all the text and messages that he said had sent. Said, this lady had Tourette's and all this social stuff because of the nature of her podcasts. I said, so every time she published on LinkedIn that who her guests were, my niece twice had discredited me to her. And at the end, the lady says to my niece, you can, I'll interview you in the podcast and you can tell your story too. but my niece declined. So I brought that to the tribal police. I said, this is after the fact. I said, after you're claiming that she's no longer following Nathan Chasing Horse, then why is she still doing this? Why is she still discrediting me? Why is there still lateral violence towards me? And again, I understand, let my audience know, people with FASE, it's not their fault that there was drinking, and the brain damage that they received, and how they tried to provide vaccine. That's why this stand means a lot, because you could ask somebody to stand beside you, but unless you're seen like that, like it's like that desperation. Once you're seen, you're desperate because somebody is listening to you. So I explained to my childhood friend who didn't quite understand why I wanted to go to Las Vegas. I said, there are people from California, Montana, men, women, Arizona, came up to me in outside the courtroom, hugged me, shook my hand. I said to my childhood friend, I didn't realize the extent of what my blog, how it influenced them to bear witness that this man was dangerous. He thanked me, and the very fact that I was there meant something to them. And I'm really grateful that they saw me. And I'm really grateful for the Fifth Estate and the investigative reporters who saw me. And for the lady who did the podcast who saw me. And for the many other Indigenous females who have been here supporting me, listening to me, how angry I get in terms of like what is Whitney doing, trying to get this recovery center. How is this going to help our children, our girls and our boys who have FASE? There's no treatment centers, there's no group homes, there's no mental health structure for them. And yet, when we have healthy living and the health center and grassroots people who are trying, I mean, our youth go downtown and try and bring our people who are suffering with addictions with no fault of their own because they have FASE, trying to help them so that they don't die on the streets or don't overdose. So that's why, for me, the money that would have been designated to come into our grassroots people has been siphoned by Malika Holmes and the Sam Mareshi, who was instrumental in closing Nietzsche, a program that helps Indigenous youth, women, men for 50 years. Why? Again, because our elders knew the Indian residential schools were going to shut down, and they wanted to help heal intergenerational trauma. Those are the grassroots people that created Nietzsche Institute. And what the hell does Danielle Smith do? She gives and parties with Roy Whitney. And then what does he do? The stud, I wouldn't call him a whore, sage, uses this deer, male deer, sends the does out into the field to see if the coast is clear. And my aunt was one of them. He had a lot of people who set out there to see if the coast is clear at their expense, at their reputation. And they took it. Like, she goes up there, reads a letter saying Roy Whitney is not associated with Danielle Smith. And yet the proof is in 2023, until he was voted out of office, all that money that came in, just so that Malika Holmes could have their sticky hands in Sutana, Enoch, and Nation. It like the dismantling of all the hard work of Indigenous men and women who are dead now. For 50 years, building up the Native Women's Shelter, for example, Nietzsche Institute. We have, these are people, grassroots people, who have their hard-earned, frontline workers. People like, I talk about, non-Indigenous people. Do you have the guts and the courage to go into homes, and to see all that, to see how dangerous people are and to try and help them. Like that's just what makes me so angry when you have people who, are like, oh, this Puritan ideology of white supremacy and, like they have privilege and oh my goodness, look how just we are as white people. I'm going, come on, get off that fucking cross and give the wood. We need it for a fucking sweat. Shit. I mean, really, I get so angry because like for 20 years, even before, like even 50 years ago, like I said, when alcohol was introduced into indigenous communities in Alberta, I saw that shift. I saw that shift. Our communities used to all come together, people were talking, and all of a sudden, in the 64, my grandmother and the Ladies Auxiliary, they fundraised, rented a tent, and started our first powwow. Now, this week, we're having a huge powwow. We have rodeo, powwow, golf tournament, fast pitch, hand game. Like that's how big it's grown. But it started off with people selling secondhand clothes, bake sales. Because my grandmother was from Dakota Nation. I was 12 or 15 when they had the first powwow here, and so understand this, Dakota Nation would have already had been having their Wachipi, they call that powwow Wachipi in Dakota Sioux, already 21 years by the time Tsuut'ina started theirs. And so, this whole, in the 70s, all of a sudden it was okay for Indigenous people to practice spirituality because it was outlawed. But yet again, because of Western Canada and just the invisible wall between Eastern Canada, the 100 years before they had to deal with systemic racism before us, the thing of helping was institutionalized and documented in the very policies of the Native Women's Shelter and Nietzsche Institute. Now, mind you, everybody, we're not all perfect. All those employees too, they're not all perfect. But I wanted to stress that, when we were so enmeshed in the fact that we didn't know drinking would cause FASE, and the fact that we didn't understand just what brain damage does. And so no matter how much I tried to reach my nieces, it was impossible. Because it's one thing to not have been traumatized or sexually assaulted. For whatever reason, because I don't know the upbringing of my niece, the one that followed Nathan, because I just wasn't around. I don't know anything about the trauma she carried. All I know is that my trying to advocate and warn people about him. He used her. He used her like he used like that woman with her 7-year-old child for 20 years. He used women like that, and again, that's what basically got him in the first place. Is like just the abuse he just literally, like, serve me, kiss my big toe and they'll do it. I use that analogy, it's very vulgar, I know, but the reality of it is just the propensity for women to hate women so much. And out of it, like I sort of sensed it, but then to actually meet the supporters who validated, yes, Marina, he did tell us about you. And like I said, she came to her poem. All the emails and all this thing that she was so madly, jilted by this man. And I told my childhood friend from Tsuut'ina, I said, yeah, and when she told me, she said, I just saw grandma. And I told my friend, I said, this is the whole point. All these followers for years, Nathan and my niece and certain people, probably this woman who stayed in my home, all discredited me. never, and people listen, never even knowing me, never wanting to see me. But the fact that I went down to Las Vegas so they could actually see me, meet me, listen to me, understand where I was coming from, and for me to understand the relationship with my niece. And they heard about my other niece, and I told them the truth. And I told them the truth about my brother going to jail, and just the whole way the community was supporting Nathan. And even too, like, who didn't even realize, like I even networked with some of his baby mamas who were trying to get child support. See, that was part of the initial way of trying to help my niece, because, my brother paid child support ever since he divorced their mother, the mom who at her funeral, her sister said she also paid the $72,000 for when she got injured in the States. You know, um, it's just the reality of people not understanding. Like I said to my childhood friend, I said, people just think, oh, it's all about Nathan Chasing Horse. I said, no, it's the paper trail. It's the leadership supporting this man. Even members within the community like myself are warning people. I said people, using lateral against me, trying to discredit me. In fact, too, like, it was very healing for me to have those supporters come up and hug me and show me respect. And I was just like totally overwhelmed. And I thought, they read my blog. And then to have like the one lady says, Marina, we were drinking the Kool-Aid. Like that, apologizing, we were drinking Kool-Aid. And so, like I said, I have two nieces that were drinking Kool-Aid. But part of the drinking of the Kool-Aid had to do with the fact that they had been burn damaged, in their mothers when they were being created, for no fault of their own. But it's the repercussions of me dealing with them because they were FASE, and how dangerous they were to themselves and others. So yes, the crisis, when people deny, oh, there's FASE, I'm going, no, I'm doing this podcast. I work, and I do work in the city with youth. We try to train young people to be youth elders, and the whole structure of addiction, and why it's important for youth elders to be in our schools, in our communities, to help other youth. And that's just drug use. Now, when you have children who are of FASD and have some are like disability of thinking skills, or the lack of it. My last weekend in Dakota Nation, my cousin's granddaughter overdosed. She's FASE, and a lot of people are in denial, even family. But the observation from my sister watching the granddaughter a couple of years ago here at Sutina, and how manipulative she was, just to get attention, just to be seen at any expense, accusing people of doing things just so she could look like she's okay, and the grandmother just believing her. So a lot of this FASE, the need for attention, the need to be seen, can be used and manipulated by people who want to control them. And so here's my cousin, she has to take her daughter to the ER. They did tests to see what she took, who gave her this drug. And so again, like I said, her mother, the mother who can't look after her, she's involved with this drug paraphernalia too. So the crisis is out there. And again, this is generational, intergenerational. We call it intergenerational trauma. Well, like I said, my age group, we didn't have that. We were very ignorant about alcohol and drug abuse. Now we have children who are in their 30s adults who have brain damage and who are trying to function, and we don't have places for them to stay. Like I said, we have to have group homes and we have to have these shelters in place. Our population is growing. We have 2,500. And the propensity for people who to understand what kind of behavior they're going to be dealing with, how they're going to be trained, all this health structure. Well, of course, the Minister of Mental Health in Alberta is not going to answer any questions when news media approaches them about this recovery center in Sutina. And for me, it really angers me, and I'm going, what the hell? Where's this bullshit coming from? You know, they can cover up all this. They can cover up all this they've had with Nathan Chasing Horse. Oh, yeah, our girls, our poor girls, they're suicidal. You know, we're spending money on them. That's bullshit. They were paying the rent and they were supporting Nathan Chasing Horse's cult. And now to cover up their bullshit, they accept this money for this recovery center. What, as a scapegoat? Our youth are intelligent enough, have gone through all this, who are standing by each other, trying to help their peers. And what does the provincial government do? Pull the money right out from under them. And our leadership is supposed to protect our children, our girls and boys. That's why it makes me so angry. And that's why I try and stick up for this young 14, 15 years old. And I said, she didn't follow Nathan Chasing Horse. Where was the chief and council supporting her? How are they compensating her for the damage she did to her 20 years ago? All those followers of Nathan Chasing Horse who drank the Kool-Aid, they've been getting money past 20 years. Their parents and everybody's, got jobs and key positions. Why? So they could be quieted. So they can't bite the hand that feeds them. The leadership who are actually taking part in this exploitation of our children. Like, really, our chief is charged with assault, sexual assault against two men. We have another counselor the charges have been dropped, but no doubt, I think the law states they still have to go to court. But the witness has settled out of court. So the guy is, and again, he's got a trucking company. How did he get that? How did he get all those contracts? Because he was listening to the chief. Everything and anything to do with construction or anything like that is all in cahoots with the leadership. So imagine when you have a whole new leadership coming into play, and all the old hold on to that tit from our chief, sucking up our band funds. I'm pretty damn sure that like that 100,000 that came in from Sam Mareshi or Malika Holmes through Terry Braun, whatever the hell is going to come out of the fucking woodwork. Shit, that lady who lost her brother, he was homeless. And for me, when I look at my own home, and I'm 64, I haven't ever received a home. And yet you've got women who marry and get a home. You get anybody who obeys, the powers that be, that get away with stuff. You have a trucking company and you get contracts because you obey the chief and council. Like, come on. Lance Minimoons made his millions off reserve in another country, and he's here to help. And he warned my cousin Jeannie to stop it. Stop putting it out on Facebook. There's enough evidence for defamation of character when they got up and spoke at our band meeting. All that is taped. Like, there's so much documentation of them slandering him. And yet, because they're so used to doing that to just the general population within the community, that they think they can still get away with it. So for me, when you have this recovery center, and again, who am I? Who the hell am I? I'm not a fucking therapist, social worker, lawyer, doctor, Indian chief. No, I'm just a female shouldn't say just. I laugh at myself because, like, really, I'm just grateful to be seen. I'm grateful that people listen to my podcast. I'm just grateful that I can do what I can and enjoy every minute of my life and to champion like the most vulnerable, our children who it's not their fault that their parents drank. It's not their fault they were born into a systemic racist system and that they don't have the critical thinking skills to dismantle it. Well, for me, I do. And no matter how much people want to hurt me, it's okay. I try to be there for my friends whose grandchildren overdose or whose granddaughters are running away from violence. You know, I'm there. I'm their ear. I'm their support. And isn't that what leadership is supposed to do? Like to be there in the most difficult places, and to be there when life is so ugly and people just are in full. You know, our central nervous system is set up in such a way. I was talking like again this morning, and I tried to do my podcast so that it's fresh in my memory, so I can share this with you. She says, Marina, you know, when she said everybody when I hugged them, their bodies were just hot. I said, yes. I said, because our central nervous system is set up in such a way. I said, in brain development or even healthy balance, I said, you know, if we give up gambling addiction, like a gambling, or if we give up pornography, like getting addicted to pornography, or if we give up going to fast foods, like addiction of eating unhealthy food. I said, so if you've got these three things, I said, if you got gambling, porn, and healthy foods, and you give that up for 3 months, your central nervous system changes. I said, so sometimes we don't even know it at a conscious level what we're creating, what we're enabling our own mental health when a crisis happens. You know, and so we're talking about death and dying and how every day we, in our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, we face this. Now, I said, so when, and I said, this is going to be triggering to you. I said, but I'm going to talk about human trafficking. I said, when they abduct these children from foster homes or wherever they steal them from, and we've got an autistic child who's been missing in Calgary for 5 days. I said, you know, in human trafficking, as soon as they have an alert, they go right to the airports to try, because they're so skilled, these traffickers, to get these children flown out of the country. I said, and yet, what, 70% of human traffickers are female. So 30% of those men, like when they get these children, they'll have sex with them all day, all night for 4 days. Their central nervous system starts, you know, like their bodies are reacting to this, and their bodies. So when somebody all of a sudden gets, somebody dies, and all of a sudden the central nervous system kicks in, the body temperature starts rising, and like I said, when I've had to deal with grief and I just get this exploding headache, that's because my body temperature is rising. So I was explaining to my childhood friend, I said, yeah, after say 4 days of sexual activity, trying to groom these girls' bodies or boys' bodies to house many sexual partners in a day, they put them in a room for their bodies to cool down. And sometimes when the body doesn't cool down, they die. I said, so when you say murdered and missing Indigenous children and women and, you know, two-spirited, it's because of this trafficking process of I don't know, orienting their central nervous system. And if they recover, if their body recovers to normal, then they're ready to have as many partners every day. So, and I use that analogy in a daily basis in how we take care of ourselves and what we choose to indulge ourselves with. It's a network in our psyche, in our brain, and how we cope with stress. So again, too, that's just part of being a human being. and that how we have to understand what it takes to have balance and to be in a healthy relationship, because all of that is attached to how we think. Now, that's why for me, when it comes to early childhood development, teenagers, young adults, and how the central nervous system is being designed for their entire lives. You know, I said I didn't want my niece on any kind of medication because her brain was still developing. I said the amount of children, like my niece is what, 20, 25, 20, 27. For 7 years, like I drove her, I took her, drove her to school because her peers who were on the school bus were so horrible. Like just, you know, like just like the way they were talking, uh, they're talking about drug paraphernalia, swearing, like just in terms of how people were coping. I didn't want my niece around that. I didn't want that influence. I didn't, you know, I wanted to protect her, and I put her through therapy. I took her to therapy for 7 years so she could understand coping mechanisms. But again, too, like, you know, we have no child youth center. And for them to say they were having a recovery center, you know, our youth aren't going to be there. Our Indigenous people aren't going to be staffed there. This is open for all people that aren't even Indigenous. At the expense of what? The very children in our community that are the most vulnerable, and their moms, but some of their moms are FASE too. So all that money, all that program money was taken away so Danielle Smith could have her cohorts like Sam Mareshi and Malika Holmes, and even this Roth, this fellow who's a lawyer who was a trustee for Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and Tall Cree. Like they froze $15 million to try and get that money back that he siphoned out of Indigenous trust funds. Like excuse me. Yes, we did all this stuff for our youth, but then people who followed Roy Whitney, people who even challenged him, like believe me, as much as I wanted to have compassion for this man, the fact that his son committed suicide, that his first wife died from this horrible illness, and the fact too, like last month his daughter died. You know, and the reality of it is like, my goodness, how guilty is this man? I don't know if he took the money out of his pocket. You know, she traveled all over the world before she died. Like, you know, what kind of guilt trip did he have? And again, this is my opinion, and I'm not saying it came directly from me. I'm just saying this is a small community. People are talking, especially when it came to this lawsuit. You know, people are going, what's going on? And I said, well, this is my whole point. When Nathan Chambers was arrested, all those followers, all that money to bring them home, like even paying like my niece that $72,000 for medical bills. All a select few of our nation people were groomed by Roy Whitney. And I said, it didn't come out of his pocket. It came out of our band funds. I said, why do you think, you know, people think I'm harping about Nathan Chasing Horse? I said, I'm harping about the fact of how he was supported by our leadership. And what do? We look the other way and we look at Marina Crane and say, oh, how unstable is she? You know, or like what they're doing to Lance Miniwounds right now. I'm going, you know, come on, people. Really? You know, I know I'm educated. I know my work skill. I know how I've, you know, had to work my whole life to be seen. And you know, when people saw me, especially in systemic racist Utah, I was like one of the lost tribes. I was never going to get to heaven because I was never going to get married in the Mormon temple. You know, I was a lost cause to begin with. So here I am, you know, like I'm a single Indigenous elder woman. Who the hell wants to have sex with me? She's an old crow. I'm going, oh my goodness, give it up. Give it up. say what you want to say about me and anything, but damn it, you leave my nieces and nephews and my siblings alone. Just the reality of it. My brother says, "Oh, well, there's no paper trail to the Crane family," and I said yes to our niece. That's $72,000 they paid for her medical. You know, uh, I have nothing in the sense of what people in Sutana believes is nothing. A company, a job, a partner, children, grandchildren. That's the status quo. But for me, and knowing that there are so many women who have been divorced, married, cheated on, that just choose not to be involved with men. I mean, I don't hate men. I love men. But some of them could be, like I said, they're the most dangerous person a woman could ever be involved with. So, of course, yes, I am quite critical when it comes to the way men think about women. And I'm also critical about women who think about other women, especially when, people think that they're matriarch. And I'm going, no, you don't understand it. Like my friend on my one podcast, she says, the chiefs at the AFN, 50% of the women are the backbones of our First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities. The men don't understand, the workforce of Indigenous women in First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities, raising their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It's a choice they made. And yet, here are the men who are saying, how can we engage with our women? And I said, well, like I said, when I was 12 to 14, and I saw my grandmother and all the grandmothers here in Tsuut'ina selling used clothes, bake sale, to fundraise. It was called a women's auxiliary. And my childhood friend, she says, women need to go back to basics. And I said, well, that's what started Tsuut'ina Nation Power, the women. I said, the men came in and said, oh, I was chief then, and I was this leader, that. Go ahead, take it. What else more can you take? Like, that's why when Indigenous women say, I don't know what we as women go through. And again, too, rightfully so, we don't know what our Indigenous men go through. But I do know that when you're a matriarch and you're Indigenous, you're born into it. You're raised in it. You have to thrive in it. And for the life of me, you have to be there. Even if your central nervous system is so shot, you still have to be there because they're depending on you. And for me, that's what the leadership in the Indigenous leadership is saying. How can we engage with women? It just breaks my heart that this Premier of Alberta, who is a woman herself, cannot see it. Cannot see how she's disrespecting all those Indigenous people, both men and women, who came before she was even born, who wanted to hold on to our spirituality because it was illegal to practice our spiritual gifts. And for Nietzsche Institute to document all this, to know that in order to feed our spirit, we had to protect our spirits. Because in order to heal, our spirits have to be well. And how it was all put there to help us heal from this legacy of Indian residential school, from this legacy of systemic racism that we're all born into as Indigenous peoples. Yes, it's important to be seen. And the reality of it is, like, I hope my viewers or the people who listen to me understand this concept and this understanding of being so negative about Indigenous people, especially women and children. You're not on the front lines. You're not there hoping that your child or grandchild doesn't get slipped a roofie or an overdose or be kidnapped and trafficked. Even our educated women go missing. So like I said, It's one thing to have a status card, and if you've never lived in First Nations and Inuit communities and you're advocating, you know you're a frontline worker. You know you have death threats because they don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear that they're racist. They think, well, oh, la-di-da, I have a token Indigenous friend. And that's why I say, this Danielle Smith and all of her cohorts are very clever at the academic level, giving out PhDs left and right. Groundwork has already been done 50 years ago. And they're dismantling Nietzsche. There's dismantling the women's shelter by putting women on the board who are Americanized. Like all this stuff, pitting nonprofit dollars against minorities, Africans against Indigenous people. It's been going on for decades. And when immigrants come in, like Muslims, and if somebody says something racist towards them, they can take it to court and charge them. But Indigenous people don't have those human rights. They don't have the same human rights as immigrants who come into Canada. So yes, I do get invited to talk with immigrants about the history of Indigenous peoples, about my parents traveling to South America and India. They're all sponsored by corporations, grooming them, all over North America. Even when I was in Utah with foster kids who talked about their parents all going to Mackinac Island being groomed by this organization so they could travel to South America and India to introduce capitalism into their systems, like Peru, Bolivia, India. Corporations. So what Donald Trump is doing, grooming and putting money with the Alberta Premier of Alberta, that's nothing. Indigenous people have been going through this ever since they discovered oil in Alberta. Industrial school, residential school, Stampede Board, Enbridge. Look at the human circus. Like, when they first discovered oil, they didn't give a damn about Indigenous rights. We had to have a ticket to just leave the community to go into the city of Calgary. And then the trafficking of those oil workers from up north coming into Calgary, prostituting Indigenous girls. That's historical with the Calgary Stampede. And again, too, statistics. The more divorces happen, more children are apprehended. Just the trafficking during that whole, humanity saying, give it, you have the right to walk around with alcohol in public. During the Stampede, my friend in Edmonton, she says, "Oh, Edmontonians are not like that. We don't wear cowboy hats. Every company, every store in Edmonton doesn't wear cowboy hats, and we don't put shit on our cowboy boots." I had to laugh because it's true. Calgary goes all out for an oil company. Why? Because we're the only city in the entire country of Canada that is so Americanized. Why? Shit. I lived in the States on my own dime with no help from the chief and council, nothing. I used to sell fry bread and tacos just so I could go move back and forth and make extra money with the help of my family. Like when I get really angry at how things turned out because people just thought that somehow Marina Crane had this magic bag of cash. That magic bag of cash is called hard fucking work. No, really. You can say, oh, what the hell? She's a bitter old hag. Go ahead, say it. I'm living my best life. People see me. People validate me. All this work, 20 years of it, and even before that, in my early 20s, trying to get a place for myself, after I was brutally assaulted so I could not be a burden to my parents, putting the budget together for the first daycare center so I could live in the basement as a janitor. Then by 24, 25, after my father passed away, my mother would have easily just gave up. But I was there, I supported her, I helped her establish the first budget for the detox treatment center because of the lateral violence she was experiencing as a widow. Again, can I be the janitor? Can I live in the basement, look after the house that's renovated? No. In fact, the chief and council, because they were related to these serial rapists, and again, the legacy of this cult, okay, even from decades ago when I was a young woman to now, all of that, my band funds were supporting them because they were in the cult with Nathan Chase. That's the legacy of these serial rapists. That's the legacy of leadership, hiding all this, what the central nervous system, this addiction, this, propensity for family violence. That's what they covered up. And yet, like I said, after I did these proposals, those leadership created a policy, and it stated any single woman 55 years and younger who did not have children could not apply for a house. So when they had this election last term, and half of the women were voted in and half men, all young, some are, close to, like some are in their close to 60. Although this leadership, this new elected chief and council, 50% are women. And these women are women who've grown up here in Tsuut'ina. They're not married in. You got to understand this too. Why would they elect women who married to Tsuut'ina for chief and council when they haven't bore witness to the injustice of living here from childhood to teenage to young adult? All this violence perpetrated against us. Of course, they're not going to vote for us. But now is the time when we have to look at our children. And we have to look at the intergenerational trauma and the impact of alcohol and drugs and the impact of sexual perversion. This whole need to control and have dominance over the weaker person. That wasn't part of the spirituality and the foundations, all the policies within Nietzsche, within Native Women's Shelter, which, bless Danielle Smith's heart, dismantled it ever since she became Premier of Alberta. I want you to understand this. Do you think that the leadership, I'm just a grunt. I shouldn't say grunt. I'm a minnow in a big ocean. And or maybe I'm not even a minnow. I'm just swimming there with all the fish and indigenous fish. Okay. Do you think I'm just one voice? I'm just one voice in this whole province of Alberta that is speaking on this insight into Danielle Smith. How naive are non-Indigenous people? And if you're listening to my podcast, I know my podcast is going to Singapore, like European countries, there's a few that go into the United States. But I'm saying, when Putin and Trump engage with Danielle Smith and with the lawyer Roth, Sam Mareshi, all these cohorts in separatism, hello, I'm 64. I've been there protesting for clean water up in northern Alberta in my early 20s, 19 years old, sitting in, protesting, trying to understand the justice that I was born into. Now, do you get it? There are hardworking chiefs and council throughout Alberta who already know these things that I'm telling you, that have been networking and want to help. And they're trusting women because we're the backbone of our communities. Now, if you can't see that and you can't see me, that's not my fault. You're going to get lost. You're going to get lost because there's a renaissance happening. And no matter how powerful Danielle Smith believes she is, the very fact that we had a young man and young men with the Tsuut'ina Nation and young women file this lawsuit It's just one of the many chiefs and councils throughout Alberta that have been dealing with this kind of politics. We were born into it. We're educated by our parents and our grandparents right from day one. Right from day one. I used to see my grandfather, you know, fixing his headdress so he could have his teepee at the Calgary Stampede to make extra money. Constantly working as a ranchman. You know, my uncles being rodeo cowboys, you know, making money. My father used to have his saddle and he used to hitchhike to all the rodeos in southern Alberta to make money. You know, he re-enlisted into the military so he could make money for his children. All these things that Indigenous people have managed to try and do and succeed to be seen. You know, my father was never seen. But, you know, that's okay because I saw him. I saw my mother. And I constantly say, I'm just truly grateful to have been my mother's caregiver so that I could see her all her life. That's all she wanted to do is be seen. Could you understand that? That's why, like, when it came to my nieces, like stand by me. Somebody stand by me. Somebody see me. You know, and even there I was saying, I'm here. I see you. They were so in love with Nathan Chasing Horse. And even to this day, all those sleeper cells of people who have mental health issues, who still believe in this charlatan, this bastardization of our spiritual ways of thinking. When we had the very foundations of our spirit documented in curriculum through Nietzsche Institute, through the people who were going through recovery, who went through that whole phase of dry drunk and their own mental health issues. We have that. We have those battle scars. And those people taught their children. Even now, the new chiefs and council that go to the AFN, they are victims of foster care systems. They are victims of being sexually violated in the foster care system, who are now leaders in their communities. So at my age and my parents' age, they were the victims of the residential school and the sexual attacks they had. So this legacy of having our children and our women not being seen has been going on for decades. We were born into it. And for all the women out there who listen to my podcast, you know, fascism is it's like somebody saying, I have a magic wand. You go to sleep, everything will be fine. And you know what? You go to sleep. And then when you wake up, you find out you have no rights. You find out you have to wear a burqa. You find out you can't even say boo because your husband could kill you. Like in the 70s in Iran, women were able to be doctors, lawyers, and leaders. And in Alberta, we're very cautious. And the more non-Indigenous women with privilege, who can get up and swear at Al Smith and say, take your fascist pancakes, you know, and become like a trend, you know, get notoriety. Good. It takes young people, it takes people, women, to stand up and say, enough. You know, where are all these, like I said, my white friend struggles. She's 65. All these women who grew up in you know, this system where they were privileged. Now, as they're elderly, they're being treated differently. So, you know, when I talk about mental health and the central nervous system as a human being, you know, we try to take care of ourselves. Take care of yourselves. Be mindful of the activities you take part in. I'm not perfect. I'm struggling, but the reality of it is like, what would I do if I didn't do the podcast? What would I do if I didn't network with women all across Canada? And I'm not just one Indigenous elder woman. There are thousands of Indigenous women across Canada who've been networking for decades. And we are the foundation of our Indigenous people. So, I just wanted to put that out there, and I hope the people who are listening from other countries, understand like we're living in a very fragile state, especially when Alberta is the third largest oil producer in the world. We're living in a very fragile situation, and we need to all understand what fascism is. Again, I'm really grateful for the ability to do a podcast and to post it, and that people are actually interested in listening to what I have to say. But again, I'm just one of many fish in the sea. And some of us can be seen and others can't. So with that, I bid you a good day. I still have to finish my coffee. And again, like I said, when I get off the phone with someone and I have this epiphany, like just this whole dialogue of like, oh my goodness, like how many years has it taken? How many years has it taken for people to actually see this young 15-year-old who was not a cult member of Nathan Chasing Horse, who was supposed to be protected by leadership, but leadership. I still champion the fact that they should compensate her. They have victim services, but yet she I don't think she's eligible. But for all the cover up and all the money that Chief Roy Whitney spent on his so-called supporters that were part of this cult, it's time to be accountable. Because somewhere, someplace, like I lost one of my nieces, and basically I've lost my other niece because for decades, I tried. And for me as an elder, I don't have the energy to continue trying with her. I don't. The energy that I have are for those nieces and nephews and family members who will listen, or even for strangers, my cohorts and allies. Yeah, I'm just grateful that when they listen to me, it's intent. They're focused on my every word, and I'm so grateful to be seen this way. So if you're one of them listening to me, thank you, the bottom of my heart. If you didn't see me, I wouldn't be putting this podcast out there.